Okay, we'll move on to the meeting proper. We have no apologies. I'll move that we confirm the agenda with the following alteration in regard to Standing Order 21.1, options for speaking and moving, that option C be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments. Seconded Councillor Wiley. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Declarations of interest. Has anybody's interest changed since our previous meeting? If not, I will move that the committee notes the elected members' interest register and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Seconded Councillor Wiley. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. On to the Part A reports. Dunedin City Council 2019 Annual Economic Profile. We've got Des coming up and Benji. Welcome to the table. Do you want to introduce this report or just go to questions?
Happy to go to questions.
Councillor Van der Vis.
I'm delighted to see that we finally are up to New Zealand averages in terms of employment. It's been a long time coming, but it's great to see, and I'm sure that a lot of local citizens will be very glad that jobs are getting a bit easier to find. But I also note that in terms of New Zealand average, we're still below, sometimes well below, in things like productivity, business growth, population growth will surprise some people here, annual earnings, house values, all still well below New Zealand averages. Is there anything that your department or the DCC can do, especially regarding productivity? Because at the end of the day, productivity really determines whether a city or area thrives or not. So in terms of the productivity issue, is there anything we can do? Is that even a question that you have been able to look at?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, in terms of productivity growth, it has remained relatively low in the city. That's not something that's unique to Dunedin. It's more or less mirrored the national average. Now, in terms of the underlying level of productivity, it is below the New Zealand average for productivity for the level, but that has quite a bit to do with the industrial orientation of the city, the mix of industries across the service sector in particular that exists. Dunedin has a much higher proportion of employment and economic activity generated from the healthcare sector and education than the national average. Now, rightly or wrongly, the way that value add is captured by entities like Statistics New Zealand when they're creating statistics, value add in those sectors is not particularly high when taken in isolation. Of course, we all know that there's a lot broader wellbeing effects from those two that are about investing in people's health and their futures. Also, another reason is because the hospitality sector is quite big in the city. Now, on to your second question about, I guess, the outlook for productivity and what's being done. I will note that if we look in the depths of the report that was attached from Infometrics, that was the basis of what we did. And on page 18 of the Infometrics report, there's a rather detailed table of ANZAC's 7-digit industries that created the most jobs during 2019. Now, the ANZAC system of classifying industries at its most detailed... Sorry, is it wrong page?
No, we have to do it.
Okay, sorry.
Page 26.
Page 26.
Cool, thank you. There's about 500 different industries, and when we look at its most detailed level, actually, towards the top is an area that Enterprise Dunedin is quite heavily beginning to move into, and that's looking at the technology sector, so through things such as code, and computer systems design related services was quite a big contributor to jobs. And I'm not trying to attribute causality here, I'm just saying those are the sort of industries, if they are to grow, they're the ones that begin to add real value to the economy and from a productivity perspective.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Thank you for the very positive report. And I think we did understand a lot of this anecdotally, but it is good to see it statistically proven. My question is around the aspirational goal that the economic development strategy had, which was for 10,000 jobs and $10,000 worth more income per annum. And it was an aspirational goal, but we're clearly well on the way, which is very positive to see. And I'm wondering whether you are getting the indication that we could be well over that, and maybe it's time to adjust that goal.
Well, taking at face value over these first 6 out of 10 years, it does appear in particular that jobs are far exceeding that goal. But I guess if we do look at the line on page 2, is it? Sorry, just the employment growth.
I was looking at page 18, which talks about...
Okay, sorry, I've just got different page numbers. Page 18, just to clarify, you'll see that initially, obviously, things were below the target and have just risen up to them. And I guess what I'd like to tease out of that is that there is always going to be inherent cyclicality in these types of things. There is a lot of momentum at present for Dunedin. There are a lot of good things in the future, a lot of investment happening in the city. But there can be cyclical factors in the short run. So I guess to raise what's happening at present, coronavirus, for example, across New Zealand with some industries is going to cause some disruptions. But that's not something that gets in the way of a long-term trend, but it can in the short run.
Thank you. And were there any surprises for you when you were looking at this and analysing it?
Yeah, look, I guess one of the things that's been a big surprise out of this for me is in the housing market, and that house prices have risen a lot recently, and so housing affordability in the city has deteriorated, but it's still during this period it has remained more affordable than the national average. I guess the challenge in that is that given there's still a trajectory of rising prices, is that it remains an affordable place for people to be able to sustainably live, work, invest and do business.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I had a couple of questions around exactly that too, and I've said many times through this. I've said many times through this plan that I think there was no linear line that you would do 1,000 jobs per year for 10 years, and I think certainly with employment, what has surprised me is seeing this figure here, the mean annual earnings that increased from 48 to 56, and then when I turned to page 56, I was looking at what the type of employment is in the country versus Dunedin, and I noticed the two things that stood out to me was one, that we've got more professional people, and quite a bit more, and there's only 2 places that we're actually ahead of the city. The other is personal service workers and community workers, and then I noticed that we're down on labourers. Now I would have thought, well, I'm trying to understand why is that. Like, we have a higher than average unemployment rate, still reasonably low. I mean, 5 people in 100 is probably a reasonable number and never going to find work, but I find it interesting that we seem to have less labourers and more professionals. Can you add any light to that?
So which table are you talking in particular?
It's well, I'll just pass it to you. So what I'm trying to understand is, why do we have a higher unemployment rate than other parts of the country? Like, we clearly have lots of professional people, but not many labourers, and I just don't quite understand why that is.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that's in recent history that's contributed to a higher structural unemployment rate has been that there's quite a bit of transition happening in the Dunedin economy. And whenever there's a transition in an economy, it does take quite a bit of time for it to begin to rectify and for those people to begin to find their way into opportunities, whether it's because they remain in Dunedin and they retrain, or or upskill into something different, or whether it's they move elsewhere and someone else comes into the city that takes up that opportunity. So when we look at unemployment, it's come down from over 6% a couple of years ago to just over 4%. So it's beginning to approach the sort of levels that we see nationally now.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is great data to have, but it's a year old now. Is there any way of expediting this process in future?
Very good question. Unfortunately, to get a really detailed structural understanding, industry by industry, we rely heavily on taxation returns because that goes into a big administrative data set that's ultimately sorted and managed by Statistics New Zealand, and there's a very long lag until that data is made available. The data people have to put in their tax returns, then it's anonymised, and then we get it. What we can do on a more regular basis is look at some very high level indicators of spending and investment behaviour, and throughout the year at upcoming meetings we will be providing you with those. It's just that they come at things from a high level and they don't give the structural understandings that we've tried to tease out in this report.
Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Yes, I agree. I had the same concern that a lot of that data is now sort of out of date. But do you have any concerns about Councillor Vandervis raised earlier? You know that we're doing really well in some things, which is great. But in about 80% of the things, perhaps about 9 of the 13, we're down a bit on the national average. Do you have any concerns about that?
Look, at this stage, most things are in a trend of improvement, even though I do acknowledge that there are indicators where Dunedin is below the national average. Scratching beneath the surface, though, of some of those shows at times there can be more to the story. So, for example, if we look at average earnings from the labour market, Dunedin's incomes in Dunedin have grown at a similar rate to the national average, but the actual underlying level is below. However, that's more to do with the national average being pulled up by Auckland and Wellington. If you look across the subset of cities below that level, Dunedin is in good company. It's not materially, it's performing better than some, worse than others. It's in the middle of that cohort. If we think of things like business growth, that's one in particular that intrigues me. I have quite an interest in looking at what's happening in the entrepreneurial sector. And when you look at business growth in Dunedin, you see that people in Dunedin are less likely to start up a business than the national average. They're more conservative in the business startup space, but when they do actually start one up, they make a really good go of it. And if we look at business death rates in the city, they are lower than the national average. So sometimes there are details beneath it.
Is there anything we could do to help the startups sort of get that? I know we've got lots of things there, like some of the co-starters and things like that, but are we working on any other things that could help that then?
There's a number of, through the chair, there's a number of things going on. There's Job Done, which we look at basically around...
Oh, that used to be 60 summer jobs, was it?
Yes, that was the previous, yes. So there's that as well. So there's a number of things like that. We also put money into the startup space. We do a lot of support in that area. Knowledge-intensive industries are growing in the city. I think there's something like around 36% of employment, just over, against the national average of about 31.7, something like that. So it shows we are taking off in some of those areas. So we are doing our best at the moment in that startup space, trying to enhance that.
So you don't think we could do anything more?
There's always something else you can do. It's just a matter of coming up with the right idea that fits with things that we're doing.
Yes. Thanks, Jess.
Councillor Barker.
Kia ora, and thank you for the report. I'm just curious, Has the report been presented to the Growing Dunedin Partnership, and did they have any feedback on it?
Sorry, I'll answer that. Growing Dunedin Partners have only just received this report because we always give council the courtesy of seeing it before we send it out publicly, but they will be discussing aspects of it and we would expect to get feedback from them.
Yeah, my other question is, as well as the two goals, because I obviously worked with this in the past, very well thumbed, GDP and income, there are actually 14 key indicators in the economic development strategy over the 5 themes. Is there a report on them as well?
Not at this stage. We'd have to look into doing a separate report for that, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Forgive me if this has already been answered, but in terms of Dunedin's comparative advantage, it shows the largest comparative advantages for several industries, and one of them I found quite surprising at water, sewage and waste. Could you unpick that for me, please? The other two are quite logical.
Yeah, so in terms of the calculations for comparative advantage, excuse me if I'm a bit sluggish in this, I'm just having a look at the table in question. So that is something that is calculated by Infometrics, the economic consultancy that wrote this attached report. It's a mechanical, data-driven way of identifying comparative advantage, and it uses a concept known as location quotient to identify potential comparative advantage. And a location quotient says that if you have more resources in your economy in a particular industry relative to the rest of New Zealand, it's likely that you have a comparative advantage in that industry. Otherwise, why would resources flow into it? But of course, there can also be other reasons. There might be just an inherently more difficult sewage system that requires more resources in it, or some historical quirk. So it's a way to identify potential, but not necessarily the gospel for comparative.
So there's no other story behind that, really. That was what I was after.
I'd have to look into it in more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Thanks for the report. I always find it really interesting to read. And that one was a question I would have had as well. Given that this is 1 year old, this report, in the sense, is there any concern about, since then, 12.5% on top of that for housing prices when it comes to affordability of the city?
What we have seen is that housing affordability has deteriorated more. It still remains more affordable than the national average.
Which is great.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, looking year on year, we've lost a lot of manufacturing. Is there anything we could do to build that up? I mean, we're looking at an engineering hub, for example, and Dunedin used to be strong in that area.
I think what is happening in the city, there's more manufacturing happening, I think, but in a niche areas. So you haven't got the large manufacturers like you had in the past. Probably the big ones you've got, the ones like your Fisher and Paykel's, etc. However, smaller ones, if you look like ASEA, they're doing very well offshore and also onshore. So those are the sort of things that are developing. You look at others like Kamahai, electronics, you know, they're doing the same thing. So the smaller companies, but they've got high-end goods.
So do you see, there's a question to you, that our manufacturing could go up given hillside workshops, etc., recommissioning?
I've still got a lot of faith in the manufacturing sector, but in that smaller, more organised, not the
niche
big
market.
Niche markets.
Councillor Lord.
I just also had a question that was to do with the business growth, and it says how fast did the number of business units grow, and then it said at the bottom a total of 11,895 business units were recorded. And I just wonder, can you just define, like in view of the fact that we've created about 6,000 out of 10,000 expected jobs, I'm trying to think, what is a business unit? Can you define that? I don't understand what that is.
Yeah, so I can give you a high-level definition because there's a very technical one by Statistics New Zealand, but they basically count it as what they term as an economically significant enterprise, and that has to have turned over a certain modest level of revenue over the year, which I believe is 30,000 is the threshold.
So does that, can I interrupt you?
Yeah, of course.
So does that mean when a company that's doing well, say a C, and puts on another 20 people and produces another $4 million of revenue, divide that by 30,000 and that gives you business units?
No, it's a legal, based around the legal structure of a business.
Yeah.
But if you were a tiny business that had just been started up, didn't actually turn over any revenue, didn't really operate, they wouldn't count you. It's as long as it was above, I think it's 30,000 is the minimum threshold. The one thing to point out is that business units can include holding companies as well. So that's why it's important not just to look at businesses and how they're doing, but also to look at what's happening for jobs on the ground, because they can tell different stories.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
My question is going to go back to the house prices, and I'm just going to touch it on when we're talking later after this question session. At 423,000 for 2019, there's in 12% growth that year. There's an ODT article that came out in February talking that the prices are now over 500,000 QV and comparable to Christchurch's. So are we seeing and I know that's not in this report, but it really does affect how we're operating now. Are we seeing still an even hotter house market as time goes on?
Yeah, the housing market certainly seems to have strengthened further in Dunedin, and lower interest rates is something that is certainly given extra fuel to that. The one thing we haven't yet seen coming through in Dunedin is a large supply response. So that's one of the things that distinguishes Dunedin from Christchurch.
Councillor Raddick.
Yeah, similar question really, because I think we now our house prices have advanced above Christchurch, and they did address their issue with supply. Do you see the lack of supply of sections of new houses in Dunedin actually driving an increase in unaffordability of living here, and then impeding our current growth trajectory?
Look, there's a lot of things at play. I mean, one of the things that has attracted people is quite clearly housing affordability. More people, better economic opportunities, lower interest rates pushes up demand. And you can get to a situation where if supply doesn't keep up, that it begins to cause challenges. And in fact, that's one of the things in planning for, the hospital rebuild and other infrastructure work around the city, and trying to make sure that there's the correct workforce in place to be able to help meet that, all that work that's in place does require housing as part of the jigsaw puzzle to come into place.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you very much for a very readable report from Infometrics, albeit Gareth Morgan founded company out of Wellington. More job opportunities for Dunedin there, I guess. Question, is there any sense that, I couldn't really tease this from the report, but is there a sense that one of the overriding competitive disadvantages in Dunedin still remains a severe lack of skills in certain sectors?
There is definitely a lack of skills in certain sectors. I think we're not the only ones across the country who are suffering the same thing. I think what we've also got coming forward is a lack of skills also within the construction industry. We're carrying out some work on that at the moment, just to give people some sort of idea what that will look like. So I'd say yes, there is a lack of skills in some engineering fraternities, as well as others, right across the board.
Can I perhaps just ask a subsequent follow-up question? You've partly answered it. So are there any other processes or methodologies by which we can address this ongoing or planned for the future?
I think it's something that needs to be done in conjunction with with companies. There's a process where you need to attract and keep people here, but also you've got the situation as housing, etc. as the housing here. So there's a number of different fronts that a number of organisations is too big for just one single entity to handle. I think it's.
Can I be so bold? Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I guess following on from that, can I assume that, for example, in construction, we're working closely with the Polytech and
with the Polytech, yes, and a number of businesses and Ministry of Social Development, etc.
Great. Thank you.
Councillor Van der Wes.
Councillor Riddick asked a question regarding the housing shortage not being met by a large supply response, and the issue of whether that difficulty that we have with not getting a supply response from developers here, the issue of whether it has to do with a difficulty in supply of sections and land, or whether developers find the rules and regulations consent options easier in adjoining areas. Have you been able to look at any of those issues at all?
I think we've looked at a number of those, and just like a number of other areas, there will be a variety of different situations that people do tell us about. Some we can resolve, some are not of our making. So I think it's a variation of different things.
Right, but in general, the low supply response that we have in Dunedin, unlike Christchurch, is you haven't really identified any particular causes for that, especially something we could influence.
There's not one particular thing that stands out as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Sorry, my question was actually about training and skills and what areas do we need to get skills in and what the training process was, but I think that was answered, so cool.
Councillor Fiso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. I think this question is for Mr. Christie. You know, I've been harping on about wellbeing, and I'm following up, I guess, on Councillor Barker's question about the long-term strategic goals, going beyond that. So that piece of work that you talked about in your response, is that going to be for the long-term plan in terms of acknowledging the fact that there's great deprivation in our community, particularly with our young people and older people and Māori and Pasifika and migrants, particularly former refugees. So for us as governors, is it a matter of us aligning the economic strategy with the wellbeing strategy for the long-term plan?
Thank you, Councillor. We very much appreciate the fact that whilst we've got some hard metrics around growing population, growing jobs and growing wealth, we do also have a real desire to make sure that we are looking after people's well-being. So the team are constantly looking at ways that they can build that into their current metrics to ensure that we can align that to both LTP and when we come to reviewing the economic development strategy, I think you'll find that will definitely be more explicit in any future document.
Councillor Hill.
I have another question for Mr. Christie as well. How are we going with the KPIs for the strategy?
Well, so the two major ones are the ones that have been reported on today, along with a lot of other detail. So I'm not sure which other metrics you're wanting to measure, but if there are some specific ones, we can look at including that in future reports.
Okay. Is it just before when you mentioned has this strategy been put on hold for a wee while, or?
No, it's currently the strategy that we're operating under.
Is it right? Is the intention to change it slightly?
The strategy was adopted by a number of stakeholders, including Dunedin City Council. That strategy was developed back in 2013, so it was a 10-year strategy which we're well through. It would be the intent to look at the revising of that strategy along with the other stakeholders, but also ensuring that it fits within the overall DCC strategy framework.
What sort of things do you think you might look at changing in that strategy?
Look, it's a little bit hard to say, but I would think most of our strategic themes are probably well positioned. Individual projects within those themes will be what we'll be looking at to ensure that we're getting growth in the areas that best suit the city. Because the city has changed a lot, even in the 6 or 7 years that this strategy's been underway. We're adapting around that where we can, without being too rigid on some of the goals that we know that are written into the old strategy. Some of those goals we know won't work in the current environment, so we'll look to take out some that are unrealistic and put other ones in that are going to meet the new environment that we're operating under.
You've raised a really good point. This strategy probably was done about the time when we had a lot of change from Tourism Dunedin to now being incorporated into ED. Are we able to get any barometer or key indicators on how that's gone since that change? Like any comparables, you know, for key deliveries compared to Tourism Dunedin to now what we've been doing?
We'd have to undertake a specific piece of research around that, councillor, if that was what council wished us to do.
But do you feel like things have been going quite, like, you know, obviously there was a report out making some suggestions. Do you feel like we're on track with those things?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes. The increase in the value of people's houses in Dunedin has contributed to the wealth of the various individuals that own their houses in Dunedin, but it's also detracted significantly from the well-being of many people in Dunedin who are now unable to buy their own houses. And so the one thing that we could do to help with the affordability of houses is on the supply side. Of course, the other thing that we could do is try and stimulate people's incomes within the city. And so with economic
Is there a question?
Yes, the question is, where does ED sit in terms of the most effective strategy to improve the well-being of the citizens of Dunedin?
I'll take that question, but Benji might want to hop in. Look, at the end of the day, the private sector will be setting wages and salaries. I'd imagine that if we're starting to see skill shortages, and particularly with major projects coming on stream, employers will have to adapt around that environment and will have to look at paying increased wages and salaries. How quickly that kicks in will depend a lot on the sector that those people are operating in and how much demand there are for those particular skill sets. So I think there's a number of factors at play. I'm not an economist, but I suspect the private sector will have to adjust around the need for increased wages and salaries.
We seem to have come to the end of questions. Would someone like to move something? Councillor Elder. We note it. So as per the papers. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wiley. Debate. Councillors. Councillor Lord.
Well, I'd just like to say that I've been here since just after the policy was brought, and I think the first sort of results I got back were the first year, and at that stage we were, I think first year might only been about 170 or 200 jobs or something, and people were saying, oh God, we're going to fail, we're useless, and all the way through I've said to Fraser a few times that, and to Suze as well, that I don't ever expect that you will draw a graph and have a start point and end point and track along it. And I'm amazed when I look at the two graphs which are now reported on page 18 and page 19 that show where we've come with job numbers and where we've come with wages. And I realise that there's factors just like inflation that help those things. No one ever thought when they set this goal those things wouldn't come into play. But our city is in a much different space to what it was in 2013. And there's a whole lot of things that, even in our finance reports, just seeing that Waipori Fund, where it was in 2013, where it is now, there's a whole lot of things that have helped and happened. You look at the value of companies like City Forest, how much they've increased, and they've got nothing to do with this report, but I just sit there and I suggested at the last economic development meeting that we should be and it was sort of tongue in cheek, but maybe these goals now we should actually be extending them, so you don't rest on your laurels and sit there and be happy when you get to, you know, 68,000 or 59,000, whatever, and 10,000 jobs, because I think we have been successful, not entirely because what you do, there are other factors that come into view, but I just think this is an outstanding start, and I'm really pleased. I've been a believer all the way through. I've always thought it was achievable, and I still think it's achievable, and I think we should set our goals higher and go harder. And I guess the one thing that, you know, I own a house, so it doesn't worry me, but when I see house prices go up, and I do see the unaffordable nature, I know people that come and try and buy houses here, and I see how difficult it's getting, and I simply don't have the answers for that. I don't know the answers, but I totally get that it has pushed a lot of houses up that really are probably reaching levels they should never have reached, and that scares me. But no, I just think this is a very, very positive report, and we should be quite excited about it. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
I think this report is particularly exciting, and I think it reflects the fact that the city is on the move. My own personal experience from the manufacturing perspective is that when I started my own space out at Invermay, I was one of only a handful of companies out there at the time. Now all the lab space at Invermay is completely booked out, and there's 25 companies operating out there. So that's a real indicator of the amount of growth that's going on. I think actually what's attracted people is the livability of the city as much as anything else, and that's something we should keep in mind. So that's my comment on the fact that I think everything's going well. I do want to come back and address the house price though, because there's an issue which I think is, again, something I've been raising. It is the perspective of Wellington on Dunedin. There was an article in the paper in February on the fact that the house prices in Dunedin have gone up past $500,000 median, and yet the government has set us as a regional centre for first-time buyers getting the $5,000 first-time buyer assistance, and the Minister has no intention of reviewing it. And so I think, and this is why I bring it up here at the Economic Development Unit, I think this is probably the appropriate committee to bring it up, given the data we've just seen today. We need more attention from Wellington, and our status as one of the 4 main centres, we've re-established it, and we need now Wellington to recognise that. And I'm imploring the government, and this is not about parties, this is about the administrative side of government as much as anything else, to pay attention to Dunedin. And I'm thinking that we now need to start actually saying to Wellington, send the right people down here, come and have a look at this place and reassess your assessment of the city. We are not anymore a provincial backwater, which I think a lot of people think we are. We are one of the 4 main regional centres. Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Yes, I agree with that, Councillor O'Malley. We're a small city, but I believe we punch above our weight in so many ways. And we have fabulous things happening. Sure, there are issues, and there's some things we can improve on, and you know, and which we've discussed today. But in general, we have so many incredible things happening. I just want to say, actually, Des and Chanel O'Brien do lots of things behind the scenes with the startup sector and the entrepreneurial people. I think they're fantastic doing that. And I want to say, I can see him sitting there, is Anthony Decker does an amazing job. I know I go on and on about this, but he does with the film sector and the film industry stuff. I used to work in Queenstown and did quite a bit around the film stuff. I never thought that Dunedin would be seen as a really great venue for film, but we are making it happen. It's something as a city, I think the council's worked proactively, particularly through Anthony Decker, to achieve, and well done. I think we're punching above our weight, and it's awesome.
Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you. Just want to also second the thoughts of Councillor O'Malley, and I also just want to thank staff for commissioning what I think is a really, really user-friendly report from Infometrics, despite the fact that some of the bar graphs look like a back-to-front Irish tricolour. But no, thank you. It really is a pleasure as a councillor to read a report that keeps things clear and concise and to the point, so thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
I think for many of us that have sat around this table for 6+ years, to finally get good data, even though it is out of date, by 11 months or so is a positive. At least we're getting a better picture than what we've had in the past. There are some concerning numbers though, and I think that's what we have to note, is the fact that actually we do lag behind the national average in many areas. And I think by getting these numbers we can see where we need to focus this term and show leadership and actually try and drag us up above the national average and actually take control of Dunedin's economy. Unfortunately, we are going to be faced with the R word in the next coming months, recession. And when we look at these numbers, we look at how can we best insulate ourselves going forward through the next 2+ years that leading economists are talking about from the effects of coronavirus. So then we start looking at where is our greatest tourism and employment numbers, and when we look at 10.2% of our city's total employment comes from tourism, the effect that it's going to have. The housing has been touched on many times by speakers around the table, and I think that is one of our scariest propositions. Dunedin was a very affordable city, and I use the word was when I consistently start hearing stories of people that are choosing to move to other areas around the country where they can afford housing and to work. We need to bring that equation back, and some of this data will show us where we need to start. But leadership is about taking this data set, these numbers, and actually using them, not just putting them on the shelf. And I think this is what this committee is going to have to do, this council is going to have to do, is show real leadership and tackle the issues that some of them were highlighted here in this report. Things aren't all rosy, but at least we now know where to dig and where we can go forward from. Thank you.
Before I give Councillor Elder her right of reply,
No.
you wish to speak?
Just before her.
You can go next. Mr. Mayor.
Very kind of you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's plenty to be happy about in this report, acknowledging its period, the data collections period leading up to March 2019, the fact that the city is outpacing national GDP growth for the first time in 2003, that more than 6,000 jobs have been created since the adoption of the Economic Development Strategy in 2013, acknowledging that obviously that correlation isn't causation, and one of the joys of local government is that when things are looking bad in the local economy, we get all the blame, and when things are looking positive, we take none of the credit. But those are the jobs that we have chosen to take on. But there is a lot. There's a lot to be positive about. And certainly the report underscores the continuing importance of education in the city, and increasingly the role of construction in the city, and that's not going to change anytime soon given the significant capital projects that are being planned or are currently underway. And I think education is important in another sense, in that I'm always wary of relying too heavily on national averages in some data sets, particularly around things like average income or median household income, because the nature of the city's demographic composition is that, by definition, 20,000+ people who live here aren't in or looking for full-time employment, and because they are here for the purposes of studying. And so I think those just are sounding a note of caution really around that. I mean, the celebratory mood is tempered somewhat, as has been alluded to, by the more recent challenges, particularly our tourism sector and our exporters are facing around coronavirus, to say nothing of the housing challenges that have been addressed. But more than that, I've been reflecting on this, and it's timely, I suppose, that they came at the same time, reflecting on this report in light of Jeanette Fitzsimon's passing last week, and she always said that a nation's well-being can't be measured as a point on a GDP graph, to which you could add a city, obviously, and the well-being of our city can't be measured as a point on a GDP graph. And it's pleasing to note that there's a desire among staff to think more broadly about our well-being, so we now have a requirement under the Local Government Act to support the cultural, social, environmental and economic well-being of our communities. And so this is certainly something that we can all be proud of, but I just wanted to note that this is only one piece of a far bigger and far more complicated picture. And while we're fortunate to be trying to address the challenges that we currently face from a position of strength economically as opposed to a position of weakness, that certainly helps. But it's meaningless really if we don't equally support the social and environmental well-being outcomes in particular that are being quite keenly felt in our community currently. Thanks.
Councillor Van der Wes.
When faced with average New Zealand statistics that don't paint a very pretty picture of what we're doing, it's always very tempting to suggest that there's lies, damned lies in statistics. The fact is that we have comprehensive info available to us. The fact is that however well we're doing, if we continue to lag in averages behind the rest of New Zealand, then I believe we do ourselves a disservice, because Dunedin has the potential not just to be average in New Zealand, but to be well above average. And this we haven't done for decades. We have got the best educated population concentration in the country. We have got a wonderful and productive hinterland. We've got tourism that is only partially been realised. We could be the gateway to the rest of the South Island in terms of the best natural harbour that the South Island has. And there is a lot of vibrancy that, although it is increasing here, still doesn't come up to national standards. I was in Napier last week and I was astonished at how go-ahead Napier is. Their port, for instance, now does bigger volumes than Auckland. It's now second only to Tauranga. And they have done an amazing job of pulling themselves together after that massive earthquake that basically annihilated the city. I note also that they have 3 inland ports, because they share our problem of not having enough space at Port Otago to really capitalise on the potential for putting volume through the port. We're talking about inland ports, and we've sort of got a bit of one. They already have 3 of them up and running and putting tremendous volumes through. This is just one example of what they're doing in Napier. They also have a theatre that could have been a picture theatre but has remained always a live theatre, and they host 140 high quality theatre events there, extremely well visited every year. Something again which Dunedin could do. We have the people and the talent to do it, we just haven't got it organised. They have. So in terms of being pleased with progress, yes, we have made progress in Dunedin and we should be pleased to have progress, but we have to recognise that the potential to do better, much better, is there. And if we don't realise that potential, if we continue to be below average on most of the stats, and agreed, the stats don't tell the whole story, but they do tell a major part of it. If we get complacent and decide that it's okay to be average or a bit below, then this number 4 category that Councillor O'Malley seems to think we still hold is out the window and permanently. The way things are going, if you want to project from current stats, and I know they are just stats, we're looking at 6 rather than 4. I don't believe that we need to go there. I think that 4 should be a very solid position for us, and that we, if we make the right decisions here over the next few years, could make sure that that is the case. Thank you for hearing me out.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, I've just got one particular point to make in terms of following on from what Councillor Van der Wes said. In terms of our tourist potential, we can see from our graph on page 63 of the report, the line for New Zealand has been a steady increase in our tourism GDP, which is a wonderful thing to see. And I think we've steadily improved over the years, and it's a great credit to the people in ED and all the tourist operators in Dunedin that have started up and developed good, vibrant industries in Dunedin. I think right now we're faced with an opportunity where tourism to other parts of the world is going to be quite inhibited. So I think over the next 12 months, people will be much more reluctant to, New Zealanders and Australians in particular are going to be quite reluctant to visit Europe and Asia. Consequently, I think now we are faced with an opportunity to encourage those people to come and visit Dunedin, in particular, the rest of New Zealand, but also all of Australia, but starting with the people of Queensland, who have an existing air link from Brisbane to Dunedin. And I think we should capitalise on the fact that that exists already, and people can come for a weekend or a week or a longer period of time and base their overseas visit in Dunedin. And I think there's an opportunity waiting for us to take advantage of. Thank you.
I'll have my say on this matter. Firstly, I'll just declare that I'm a glass half full person. And I read in this report that the city has turned a corner. So in my working life, we've gone from a city that was based primarily around bigger engineering companies and manufacturing, freezing works, those big businesses. But that wasn't sustainable. We're too far away from our markets. Freight costs killed those businesses. And technology killed those businesses because many of them didn't keep up. So what I see is we're going through a transition. So, when people talk about Dunedin having gone through bad times, it was a no growth, low growth city. That, I think, during my lifetime, was this transition going through. Now we're coming out the other side. What's driving that? We have, it's been mentioned, an education sector that is very vibrant. The best education providers probably in New Zealand in both the university and the polytechnic. We have a growing entrepreneur and growing technology companies in this city, and that isn't going to stop. So I think we've got some dark clouds on the horizon. I tend to agree with Councillor Raddick that we could sit and have the glass half empty view of our tourism sector with COVID-19. On the other hand, I think there is actually an opportunity. We will go through a bad patch, there is no doubt about that. But if we put our effort into encouraging tourists, as things settle a little bit, and let's assume that we don't get as badly burnt as Italy is currently, and of course Asia, then I think there is an opportunity for us to be a safe haven for people who want to have a holiday. So here's an opportunity for us. Longer term, I think our big problem, well, short term and definitely into the long term, is housing. Grow Dunedin Partnership at their last meeting certainly saw that as probably now the emerging biggest issue and the area needing the greatest degree of focus. Because the bottom line is, if we can't fix our housing problem, firstly, we won't continue to grow, and secondly, those members of our community on low incomes who are struggling will see rent rises that will seriously harm them. So we have a major issue, I believe, as a city, and it will be an area that I think, from an economic development point of view, we will have to focus our efforts. So I'm really encouraged by this report, and I'd like to thank John and the team in Enterprise Dunedin. They have worked very hard through the last few years. I think there is a need now to update our strategy. We certainly need to have a high-level measure on livability / quality of life as one of our indicators. When this current strategy was written, it was all about trying to get jobs and more money. I think we're seeing that now. Now we have to make sure that it's more balanced, put the third leg on the stool and try and get a city that is livable, where people can have a good lifestyle. So with that, Rachel, your right of reply.
I just want to thank for the Informatrix report. It really enables us, data enables us to dig down into what are really good things we can celebrate, but also the areas in which we need to grow and develop further. Looking at Dunedin's image across New Zealand, it is seen in the last few years as a vibrant, go-ahead, dynamic place with lots of events, and startup has been recognised across New Zealand now as a great startup space. So those kind of things, and our education offering with, we've got a whole lot of companies now that are selling education product across the world, in fact. So there's a lot of really good stuff happening. But it also helps us drill down into some of the areas where we can work on, which is the opportunity of doing training and having a strategy around training and what those areas might be. And the regional partnership is looking at that. And I also think, again, the issue around housing and how that will, if we don't look at it from a number of angles, constrain our growth. But it is really exciting to see the growth of 6,000 jobs and the growth in people's incomes, because in fact that enables people to access the opportunities that are available in our city, such as going to a concert, for example, and enables health and wellbeing outputs to be achieved as well. So yes, we are seeing as vibrant, attractive and go ahead, and there's some really good stats in there, but we need to use those other stats to actually develop our city further. And I'm excited about the potential of, say, hillside workshops, etc., the potential of code, the actual potential attraction of finishing the cycleway from Portobello to Port Chalmers, which I think will actually change our tourism offering hugely. So there's plenty to celebrate, plenty of growth ahead, and it's about managing that growth that this data set enables us to drill down and look forward to seeing what happens out of that.
I'll put it, those for? Aye. Against? Carried. Okay, we'll move on to item 6, Enterprise Dunedin Activity Report for March 2020. We'll welcome Fraser Liggett and Malcolm Anderson. Gentlemen, do you wish to introduce anything in the report or just go straight to questions?
I think we're having to go straight to questions, Mr. Chair.
Questions, councillors. Councillor Gary.
I have quite a number. Thank you very much. Page 70, around the regional outcomes, multi-district benefits. Could you give some examples of that, Mr. Liggett?
Just to clarify, Councillor Gary, is that just under the Otago Regional Economic
Yes, that's
Framework?
right, sorry. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no problems at all. This is a piece of work that's been ongoing probably for the last 18 months, and we have, we presented back the framework to the committee and to council late last year, so I was just getting my dates firmly back in my mind, which basically talked about the delivery of a framework which can deliver multi-district benefits, especially around some of the issues we've been discussing this afternoon, around talent attraction, around housing, around productivity, around connectedness, and a range of other issues within there. So that piece of work is actually now being advanced because we have appointed 2 regional economic advisors, and we're currently working with the other councils in terms of preparing a plan which will take forward to identify those specific projects. We do deliver on regional benefits at the moment, and through collaboration such as around film activities that we do work on, regional business partnership again as well, but these will be new initiatives that we propose to pull together in conjunction with other councils as well.
Thank you. And moving on to film, page 71, and perhaps this is a question for Mr. Deaker. I was interested to know what the growth was in the use of local talent on the various films we have being shot in Dunedin.
I'm happy to pass over that rock star, Mr. Deacon, to challenge and say that question. Thank you for the question. I take it you mean the crew?
The crew and extras.
Crew, yeah. The last, what we have seen in the last 6 months is that more and more crew are being able to go from job to job, and that's been coming into the role on a part-time basis a couple of years ago. That was the major concern amongst local crew, was that precarious workflow, and it's been one of our goals is really to be able to represent and generate more work, and that is slowly happening. There's still a long way to go.
Thank you. And my final question, Mr. Mick, through you, in terms of visit and delegates to conferences, I've noticed that the niche conferences, HUIs, etc., has grown. Would that be your, I just want to check in with you, would that be your experience? And I'm talking about the smaller ones, certainly in the statistics, that's indication, but in terms of topic, they seem to be very niche.
Yes, I think that the key market for us in terms of that area is around 250 delegates. That's what suits Dunedin really well. We can obviously do more, we can do less, but 250 is a really good number for us.
And final question is around delegates. I went and welcomed a conference during the holidays about the 9th of January, and it was very evident to me there'd been a shift with delegates in terms of how they view their travel. I was wanting to know what we're doing to assist in terms of the interest in offsetting carbon emissions through international air travel for delegates coming to conferences.
So we're working with Tourism New Zealand as a pilot to do exactly that, and other things in terms of the whole sustainability opportunities. So the conference and incentives market is pretty much all moving into that space, but we're seen as one of the leaders in that area. So our work with Tourism New Zealand will really add value to that.
Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you for the report. It's been over a year since the Martin Jenkins report with the 19 recommendations was presented to Council, and it was last reported on the 2nd of July last year. I wonder if there's an update on the implementation of the review?
In answer to that question, yes, we are intending to bring a report back to Council.
When might that be?
Probably the next committee round.
Councillor Hullane.
Thank you. Yes, we were at the Host Dunedin meeting where I believe the Council's looking at changing some of its marketing strategies because of that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, like the domestic targeting around is it the Chinese from Auckland and domestically, and sort of the what you're looking at in the forms of the market change? Thanks.
Sure. It's a hard question to answer in the sense there's a lot happening in this space at the moment, obviously. So it's pretty hard to give you a definitive answer, but essentially we are taking a look at where our main potential markets are, and they will be domestic, and that includes parts of Australia. Internationally, again, there's a lot happening in that space, but I think there's great opportunities for us, especially out of North America. So United Airlines is flying American Airlines is flying direct into Christchurch starting later this year. That's a great opportunity for us as well, given nothing else goes wrong with viruses.
Was it correct that you were going to look at targeting sort of the Chinese that are in Auckland, maybe to look, because they'll still maybe want to travel, so for domestic travel, is that what you were thinking?
That's the current campaign that we're working through with a number of different partners, and that's the market that's been identified with one of our partners, which is in New Zealand, to try and grow.
Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Just a couple of questions. Just related to code, we've done a lot of work in that space, but you see our role changing, and what would you say we're looking at?
Yeah, so we're currently in the establishment period of code, which we anticipate will be completed probably around about the middle of the year. Within the business case of code, we always anticipated or used the turn of phrase of creating a fit-for-purpose entity. And while we played a leadership role in preparation of the business case in conjunction with the city partners and industry, we need to determine what role we would actually play in that entity going forward. So we're currently, that's a current work stream which is attracting a high degree of focus and looking at those options in terms of what that structure would look like. Councils are very well suited for certain activities, but possibly less suited maybe for others, especially around the nature of what we're trying to achieve within code. I anticipate that we'll still have a role within there, and a very strong role in terms of the work we'll put in there, but it may not be necessarily as an owner of that entity as it goes forward, but that's the work that we're going through now.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
I'll come back.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered if, this is around Study Dunedin, and I wondered if Ms Reid would be able to answer this question. Clearly the report was written some days ago, and this is a fast moving pace. I wonder if we could have an update. Would that be possible on where our various educational institutions sit with their students?
I'm happy to pull on another roster, I guess.
The latest update we have is stuff that's beyond our control, because we've got other governments now involved in pulling their students back. So, for example, the US government has announced that it's going to bring all its study abroad and exchange students back to America. So that's our second biggest market. So the university is just working through what that actually means. So that's the latest from the American market. We've got, and there are now, because the spread is becoming so wide, there are groups who were going to come and visit New Zealand who are now pulling out because it's just not viable to be travelling around the world at the moment. So we have a group from, a high school group from Thailand of 50 that's now not coming. We do have, the University and Polytechnic are aware of students still coming out of China who are self-isolating in other countries like Thailand and Malaysia. There are about 20 of them at the moment who are making their way to New Zealand via other ways, and they are very aware of those students, and they will deal with them appropriately as they enter the country. So that's where we're at the moment.
And can I ask about pastoral care for the students who are here and isolated? I imagine there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes quietly in that space.
Yes, so the high schools are fine because all of their students have now been here for 4 or 5 weeks, and they're in school and things are normal for them. We do have a number of tertiary students who are self-isolating that are being specifically looked after, especially through the university in one space, and they are being well looked after there.
Thank you very much.
No other questions? Would someone like to move that we note the report? Councillor Wiley, seconded Councillor Hall. Discussion. Councillor Gary.
I wanted to take this opportunity to make a point around resourcing various projects. We've seen demonstration in this film, in this activity report, and in the previous report, of how positive it is and the positive results you can get when you adequately resource and staff particular areas. And I want to take the example of film. We have a dedicated film person, and I doubt that had we not had that dedicated role, we would not have had the positive outcome in that particular area that we have. And we're also very fortunate to have somebody in it who's doing an excellent job, which is the case for all of our staff, and many of them in the room, who have contributed to the activities in this report. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and just remind colleagues about that as we go through our decisions. I know there's been a lot of talk during the annual plan meetings around staff costs and staff numbers, and I just want to remind colleagues how important it is that we have the staff to do the jobs that we need to get done and the positive outcomes as a result of that. And also just want to register thanks for the work that has been done so well through Mr. Christie.
No other speakers? Right of reply? No. Okay, I will put it. Those for? Aye. Against? Carried. Last item on the agenda, items for consideration by the Chair. There is none? Very good. We will take a very short break and resume as council.